Story number 1. The Haunted Cargo. Most truckers will tell you about the loneliness of the open road, the strung-out nights and half-lit truck stops, the endless hum of diesel engines that lulls you into a half-awake stupor. I'm no different. My name is Charlie O'Neill, and I've been driving big rigs for nearly 2 decades, crisscrossing the country on whatever route paid the bills. There's a certain thrill in that endless horizon, that sense of freedom. But sometimes, the horizon can feel like it's swallowing you whole, and on very rare occasions, you wonder if it's not something else out there, creeping across the darkness. Something that should have remained buried in your blind spot. The oddest run of my career came a few months ago, when I was between contracts and low on cash. I just rolled into Barstow, California, parked my rig in a dusty lot, and went in search of a cheap plate of eggs. I had an old friend, Tex, who sometimes lined me up with short hauls. He called while I was sipping coffee. "Charlie, got a proposition. Pays triple. Under the table. If you're up for something unusual." I asked what unusual meant. Tex just said, "Clients hush hush, but it's a big payday. Destination is someplace remote in the Colorado mountains. Cargo sealed, no questions asked." I should have known better. A job that coy and that profitable? Bound to be trouble. But the mortgage on my home had me by the throat, so I told Tex to sign me up. He texted me an address on the outskirts of Barstow, told me to head there at sundown. Client would load the trailer, pay in cash. No negotiations, no receipts. I didn't like it, but money is money. Sure enough, come dusk, I found myself bouncing along a deserted side road, dust swirling in the beams of my headlights. The place looked like an old warehouse complex, half-collapsed chain-link fences, tumbleweeds skittering across cracked asphalt. My rig, a battered Peterbilt I lovingly called Dolly, rattled as I pulled up next to a corrugated metal building. One overhead lamp flickered, painting the yard in jaundiced light. A tall figure stepped from the shadows, pale, sharp cheekbones, wearing a black coat that seemed too heavy for the desert heat. He introduced himself as Mr. Anderson, voice low and raspy. I asked about the cargo. He gave a thin smile, waved me inside. We walked through the gloom, past dusty crates, until we reached a single large wooden box, maybe 8 feet long, 4 wide, and a couple feet high. It was bound with thick metal bands and a heavy lock. The shape gave me goosebumps. It reminded me of a coffin. My stomach turned. Mr. Anderson motioned for 2 burly men to hoist the box. They slid it into my trailer with surprising care, as if it were fragile. He turned to me. "No stops. Drive straight until you reach the location in Colorado. Coordinates are here." He handed me a slip of paper. "Deliver it to the caretaker. He'll pay you the remainder. No questions. Do not open it. Understood?" My mouth was dry. "Sure," I managed, forcing a laugh. "I'm not in the business of opening locked cargo." Anderson's pale eyes bored into me. "Good. Because what's inside must stay sealed." He thrust an envelope into my hand, thick with cash, a hefty advance. My heart pounded. For a second, I sensed a faint smell of decay on his clothes, like old soil or stagnant water. But he said nothing more, just walked off into the darkness. I climbed into Dolly's cab, forcibly ignoring the uneasy knot in my gut. As I pulled out, the warehouse lights blinked off behind me. The night swallowed the building. My GPS beeped as I entered the coordinates, revealing a route slicing across desert highways, then winding into mountain roads. The estimated drive time was about 20 hours, not counting breaks. I decided to push through. For the first few hours, everything was routine, just me and Dolly cruising the deserted roads, the radio scanning stations that fuzzed in and out. Once or twice, I felt a bump in the trailer, but wrote it off as the cargo shifting. I tried not to think about what might be inside that crate. Some exotic contraband? A stolen artifact? Hell, for the money I was getting, maybe it was something worse. But a job's a job, right? Around midnight, I stopped at a lonely truck stop to grab coffee. Something made me reluctant to kill the engine, but I needed a bathroom break. I slid out of Dolly and ventured into the harsh fluorescent lighting of the store. The place was deserted except for a bored cashier. I hurried back, coffee in hand, and that's when I heard it, a faint thud from inside my trailer, like someone hitting the walls. My chest tightened. Could something inside be alive? A coyote or some poor soul? My imagination ran wild. Creeping to the back, I laid a hand on the trailer's side. Another muffled thud. My pulse hammered. If it was an animal, it sounded big. But then the noises ceased. Chill night wind rustled my hair. Screw it, I whispered, hopped into Dolly's seat, and sped off. I tried rationalizing the noise of cargo shifting on rough pavement. But that memory of the box's shape gnawed at me. As dawn approached, I was deep in the highways of Arizona, the sky a watercolor of pink and orange. Fatigue weighed on me. I decided to snag a nap at a rest area, ignoring Mr. Anderson's no-stops order. I can't drive safely half asleep, sorry. So I parked, locked the trailer, and dozed off in the sleeper berth. It wasn't restful. I had a dream. Dolly's trailer door swung open, revealing a coffin-like crate. A slow scraping noise came from within. Then, a voice, a whisper so faint I barely caught it, saying, "You must carry me, bury me." I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. My watch read 7:30 a.m. enough to keep going. The next stretch was bland desert. By noon, I crossed into Colorado. The mountains loomed ahead, dark silhouettes against the sky. My GPS assured me the route twisted through some minor highways up into a region with few towns. I felt uneasy, imagining all the ways to hide a body, or a coffin, in remote mountains. Maybe that's exactly what was happening. They were using me to transport a corpse. At around 2 p.m., the trailer started rattling again. This time, it was more distinct, like a series of knocks. My skin crawled. A rational mind would say a loose tie-down is flapping. But something in me, that primal sense, insisted it wasn't. I turned the radio volume up, as if drowning out the knocks would banish them. No luck. They continued sporadically, sometimes fading, sometimes intensifying. Eventually, I couldn't take it. I pulled over on a wide shoulder, hopped out, approached the trailer door. The moment my boots crunched gravel, the knock stopped. Silence pressed in. My hands shook as I unlatched the padlock on the trailer, though I didn't open it all the way, just enough to peek in. The cargo was as we'd loaded it, a single large wooden crate strapped down. No sign of movement. A weird smell lingered, a faint stench of damp earth and something old. My stomach churned. If this was a body, it had begun to reek. I hurriedly shut the trailer, ignoring the sense of dread. Clouds gathered overhead, a storm threatening as I navigated the final hours into the mountains. The road became narrow, winding along steep drop-offs. The crate's presence weighed on me like a physical thing. Each curve, I imagined it shifting inside, scraping. My anxiety soared. Thunder growled in the distance. By nightfall, I was truly in the middle of nowhere, the GPS arrow pointing me onto a small dirt path that branched from a half-paved county road. Rain started slashing the windshield. The headlights illuminated thick pines on either side, branches clawing at the sky. I crept forward, feeling lost. Eventually, the GPS beeped, "You've arrived at your destination." I stared out at darkness. No house in sight, no sign of life except a battered mailbox leaning near the track. I muttered. Where's my client? This was supposed to be a caretaker's address. I pulled Dolly as far off the muddy track as I could, hopped down. Wind whipped my jacket. I shone a flashlight around. Up a small hill, I glimpsed a shape, a faint glow of a cabin or something. That must be it. I locked Dolly, braced against the storm, and trudged up the muddy slope. Lightning flashed, revealing a small lodge or maybe a decrepit old chapel. Hard to say in that strobing light. At the door, I found no bell, just heavy wooden planks. I knocked, rain soaking me. No answer. I knocked again, cursing my situation. Then, with a creak, the door drifted open on its own. Great. Real welcoming. Inside, a single lantern burned on a rough-hewn table. The place looked like a small church or funeral parlor, rows of benches, a raised dais at the front. My breath caught. This was no caretaker's cabin. It was more like a funeral chapel. The stench of old incense mixed with damp pine. A figure emerged from the shadows, a stooped elderly man in a dark robe, face shrouded in the hood. My pulse jumped. He spoke softly. "You have it?" I swallowed. Yes, the cargo. Are you the caretaker?" He nodded. "Bring it inside." I hesitated. "Sir, the roads are bad, the trailer's stuck." "Are you sure?" He cut me off with surprising firmness. "It must be brought here. That is your task." I bristled. "Look, I just deliver. Usually, you have folks to unload. My rig's quite large." But the caretaker just stared with unsettling intensity. "The coffin cannot remain in your trailer another night. Bring it now, or we both regret it." Something about the urgency in his tone spooked me. Grumbling inwardly, I trudged back, started wrestling with Dolly's hydraulic lift. The caretaker emerged behind me, surprisingly strong for his age. We lowered the trailer door, unfastened the straps. A putrid wave of odor hit me, stronger now that the crate was exposed to the rain. My gut churned. "What the hell's in there?" I muttered. The caretaker avoided my gaze. We slid the crate onto a dolly, carefully rolling it through the mud, up the slope, into that chapel-like building. Lightning lit the sky, thunder rattling the old beams. The caretaker guided us down a side corridor, into a large room with a stone floor, an antechamber of some kind. The walls were lined with archaic symbols, carved in stone. My hair stood on end. This was no typical chapel. It was older, hidden. Candles flickered, revealing a makeshift altar and a freshly dug pit in the center of the floor. My heart pounded. A grave indoors? We set the crate down. The caretaker knelt, producing a ring of old keys. He set them near the crate's lock but paused, glancing at me. "You must help me bury it," he said, voice trembling. "Only then can its spirit rest." I froze, recalling Mr. Anderson's warning, "Never open it." "Wait," I said, "the man who hired me said keep it sealed." The caretaker's face twisted in pain. "That man knows nothing of the curse. The coffin must be laid to rest and sealed in hallowed ground. Otherwise, it will remain restless, claiming more victims. Already it's bound to you, driver." My mouth went dry. "Bound to me?" He nodded gravely. "By accepting this contract, you became the chosen courier. If you walk away now, it will follow you, plague your nights, eventually claim your life. Unless you do what must be done." Terror rooted me, yet a flicker of resignation set in. "Fine," I croaked. "But no opening, right?" He hesitated. "We have to open it to cleanse it, then bury." I shook my head wildly. "No, I was told not to." He gripped my shoulder with surprising strength. "Listen, or you die. This coffin holds a cursed soul, restless and vengeful. It must be sanctified, then sealed in the pit. I can't do it alone." Lightning flashed, illuminating his aged, determined face. I inhaled, steadying myself. "Okay," I said hoarsely. "Let's just do it." The caretaker unlocked the crate's steel clamps. My stomach churned, expecting to see a rotted corpse. Instead, inside was indeed a coffin, old wood bound in tarnished metal, carved with runes that glistened in the lantern light. The caretaker muttered incantations under his breath. The coffin's surface felt ice cold. Something inside seemed to shift. He pried the coffin's lid open just an inch. A hideous stench of decay spilled out, strong enough to make me gag. The caretaker hissed, pressing a small amulet against the open seam, chanting. The stench receded slightly. Slowly, we lifted the lid. My flashlight beam trembled over the interior. At first, it looked empty, just blackness. Then I saw it, a skeletal figure wrapped in tattered cloth, a strange mummification. The caretaker sprinkled a powdered substance along the edges. The air crackled with unseen energy. My ears popped. Beneath the wrappings, a faint glow pulsed, as if the bones themselves radiated an unholy light. My mind screamed to run, but I forced myself to stay, following the caretaker's instructions. Pour the salt circle, he urged. I grabbed a bag from the corner, circling the coffin with thick lines of salt. Next, we hoisted it out of the crate and placed it at the edge of the pit. The caretaker lit a series of black candles, chanting in a language that made my skin prickle. The thunder outside reached a fever pitch, the wind howling through the cracks. Then the caretaker gestured for me to help lower the coffin into the pit. We used ropes, grunting under its unnatural weight. As it descended, a wailing shriek pierced my head, like nails scraping my brain, though maybe no real sound manifested. I staggered, almost dropping my rope. The caretaker pressed on, voice firm. "Stand strong," he barked. We finally got it resting at the bottom of the pit. He tossed in more powder, chanting. The shriek rose in my mind, fury and despair entwined. My vision blurred with tears. The caretaker completed his incantation, and with a final word, the shriek cut off abruptly. Like a door slamming shut on a screaming figure. Silence. The caretaker exhaled, trembling. "It is done." I sagged to my knees, relief flooding me. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, eyes stinging. He wiped sweat from his brow. "A tormented spirit, cursed to wander until properly laid to rest." "That man who hired you?" "He merely tried to bury it in some obscure place, but no real burial or ritual. The spirit would have lingered, roamed, destroyed you eventually. Now it's quiet." Lightning flickered one last time, revealing the caretaker's lined face, weary but satisfied. We pushed dirt into the pit, sealing the coffin. My entire body ached. When we were done, the caretaker gave me a solemn nod. "You have done your part. The soul is finally at peace, and so are you." He led me back into the main hall. Rain hammered the roof. "Your payment," he said, handing me a small envelope. Inside was more cash than I'd expected, maybe a bonus for the risk. I realized, though, that no amount of money could wash away the memory of that final shriek. At dawn, the storm subsided. The caretaker accompanied me outside, where Dolly waited. Strangely, I felt Dolly's presence as calmer, as if the entire rig was free of a menacing presence. I turned to the caretaker, wanting to ask so many questions, but his expression told me I'd get no more. I drove away, the mud sucking at Dolly's tires. The caretaker stood in the distance, silhouette fading in the gray morning light. My mind still reeled. A coffin, a cursed spirit, an ancient rite, things that belonged in horror stories, not my daily trucking route. But I was living proof it happened. The next few days, I half expected nightmares or restless knocks in the night. Instead, I slept deeper than I had in years. Something about laying that spirit to rest gave me a sense of closure, even though it wasn't my burden to begin with. The payment, once I counted it, was nearly triple the normal freight rate. Enough to ease my financial worries for a while. Still, sometimes, late at night on an empty highway, I recall that hush in the trailer, the faint thuds, and the final shriek in my head. My skin crawls. I wonder how many other truckers have unknowingly carried haunted cargo, how many cursed relics traversed the roads beneath the cover of darkness. Because if there's one thing I learned, it's that the roads hold secrets far stranger than anything you find in a dispatch office. Now, when I take on a new contract, I always ask a few more questions. I get details about the cargo, check references. Not that it'll protect me from every weird deal, but I learned a lesson. The world's bigger and darker than we like to admit. Some relics belong in the ground, their restless souls eager to latch onto anyone who might give them a ride. If you ever find yourself offered a hush-hush job with an impossibly high payday, maybe think twice. Because you never know if you'll be hauling some doomed spirit's coffin, fated to become the chosen courier of a haunting you can't escape, unless you bury it in the shadows, once and for all. Story number 2. The Never-Ending Run. I got the call on a Sunday afternoon, just as I was about to crack open a beer and watch some mindless TV. It was the dispatcher's voice on the other end, urgent and breathless, telling me they had an emergency haul that couldn't wait. I was the only one available. Would I take it? My name is Hank Travers, and I've been driving long-haul trucks for nearly 15 years. Not much spooks me on the road anymore, not after crossing the country more times than I can count. But if I'd known what waited for me on that route, I might have hung up right then and there. I should have known something was off from the get-go. The dispatcher, Frankie, a friend of mine, sounded rattled. Usually he's all jokes, chewing gum and letting out half-laughed curses about the job. This time, his voice was tense. "Hank, we got a big problem," he said. "Client's cargo is urgent, gotta move it tonight, but everyone else is tied up or out of range. You're the only one who can do it." I asked what the cargo was. He hesitated. "They didn't say. Something from up north, heading south. They'll text you the pickup location in an hour." I sighed, glancing longingly at the beer in my fridge. Then I said yes. Work's been slow, and I had bills piling up. Frankie gave me a grateful note. "You're a lifesaver, bud. The pay's triple the usual rate." That sealed the deal. I packed a quick bag, hopped in my rig, a battered Kenworth with the left headlight always threatening to die, and headed out. The text came around 5, an address in a remote industrial park about 50 miles away. It was already evening by the time I arrived. The place was deserted, a single warehouse with one flickering bulb overhead. A stern-faced woman in a black coat ushered me in, showed me a large, sealed crate. The label was cryptic, confidential, do not open. She thrust a paper at me with coordinates for the drop-off. "No stops," she said flatly. "No delays. And do not deviate from the route." I shrugged. Most unusual instructions get old real quick in this business, people paranoid about theft or secrecy or contraband. I set the crate in my trailer, locked it down, and hopped in the cab to program the coordinates. My GPS beeped, showing me a path that carved through some lesser-used highways and side roads. The destination was over 600 miles away, no big deal for an overnight run, right? But from the moment I pulled out of that warehouse, something weighed on me. A hush in the air, or maybe the stiff look in that woman's eyes as I drove off. She didn't wave, just receded into the shadows. I chalked it up to nerves, told myself to relax. Once I hit the open highway, I let Dolly, the affectionate name for my Kenworth, roll. The first hour was smooth, the night air slipping past my open window. But somewhere along a lonely stretch of road, my GPS pinged. "Turn left in 0.5 miles, it said, in that calm synthetic voice. I frowned. The map on the screen shifted, showing a turn onto a narrow route that didn't look well maintained. I paused. The instructions from the woman said, "Follow the route exactly." So I did. Dolly's headlights swept across an old sign reading Bridlewood Road, half rusted. The pavement was cracked, weeds pushing through. I double-checked the coordinates on my phone, but there was zero signal. Great. The GPS beeped, so I had to trust it. Hour after hour, I navigated twisting roads, each emptier than the last. No sign of truck stops, no lights beyond the ones Dolly provided. By midnight, I was deep in the wilderness. My GPS said I'd made good progress, maybe halfway. That's when the weirdness began. The screen on the dash flickered momentarily, the route lines pixelating. Then it corrected, telling me to continue for 15 miles and turn right. I frowned. My original route said a left turn eventually, not a right. But I had no phone signal, so I followed the new instruction. The road quickly got narrower, the trees closing in, the air thick. Dolly's headlights carved a tunnel of light through dense forest. I told myself maybe it was a detour. But each time I covered a few more miles, the GPS changed direction again. Another random turn. Another twist. I tried ignoring it, picking what I thought was the original route, but after a few miles, the GPS recalculated, demanding I go back. My gut churned. It felt like the device had a mind of its own, leading me in circles. By 2 a.m., I was hopelessly turned around. The roads all looked the same, narrow, tree-lined, potholed. No road signs, no mile markers. The only sign of civilization was an occasional old wooden shack with boarded-up windows or a collapsed barn swallowed by vines. My tension rose. Dolly's fuel gauge read half a tank, but I worried about how long I might wander. The cargo in my trailer remained silent, at least. Then I noticed the first sign that I was going in literal circles, a toppled mailbox with half the letters missing. I passed it once, maybe an hour prior. And here it was again, on my right side. I cursed, slamming the steering wheel. Damn it, we're looping. I pulled Dolly over, killed the engine for a second. The night was deathly quiet, not even crickets. I fiddled with the GPS, hoping to reset it. But it refused to show me a new route. Instead, the screen glitched, lines flickering, a red arrow spinning aimlessly. My phone had 0 bars. Perfect. A creeping dread settled in my gut. It felt like no matter which road I chose, I ended back at the same landmarks. I tried to recall if there was a large intersection I might have missed. But all the roads seemed to feed into each other in a tangle, no clear logic. As if this region was a labyrinth designed to trap me. A voice in my head whispered, "The cargo wants you here." I shook that off, refired Dolly's engine, picked a random direction. I told myself I'd find a major road eventually. Keep driving. Time blurred. Each new fork in the road the GPS insisted on taking me down looked more twisted, more overgrown. My headlights caught glimpses of shapes in the trees, bent branches that looked like talons, stumps that resembled crouching figures. The darkness weighed heavy. Around 3:30 a.m., I saw lights ahead, a faint glow. Relief washed over me. Maybe a house with a phone or a small store. But as I approached, I realized it was just a single old gas station, half collapsed. The lights flickered from a single overhead lamp near the pumps. My heart soared anyway, maybe I'd ask directions. I pulled in. Dolly's tires crunched gravel. The station was abandoned, or so it seemed. No sign of a clerk. The store's windows were dusty, with newspapers taped across them. The pumps were old mechanical units, likely not functional. Yet the overhead lamp shone unwaveringly. My hair prickled. This didn't feel right. Still, I needed guidance. I hopped out, calling, "Hello?" My voice echoed. No answer. I circled the building, shining my flashlight into the dark interior. Empty shelves, a layer of dust, spiderwebs. This station had been dead for years. Then how was the lamp on? A shape flickered at the corner of my eye. I spun, heart pounding, but saw only the shadow of Dolly's trailer. The crate inside seemed to loom, though that was probably my imagination. I exhaled shakily, decided there was no help here. I'd keep going. Back on the road, the sense of entrapment grew. The sky remained moonless, the trees forming a tunnel overhead. The GPS repeated the same instructions, in 2 miles, turn right. I tried ignoring it, forging straight, only to pass that same mailbox again. My chest tightened, breath shallow. This was insane. Desperate, I tried turning Dolly around fully, heading back the way I came. But after miles of careful backtracking, I ended up at another intersection that led me back into the forest from a different angle. The roads refused to let me out. By 4:30 a.m., exhaustion battered me. The cargo remained silent, though each time Dolly hit a bump, I swore I heard a faint rustling inside the crate. I pictured the monstrous possibility, maybe a coffin or caged creature. My skin crawled. Then came the voices on the radio. The FM band was static for hours, but suddenly it crackled, as if picking up faint transmissions. I tried scanning channels, and on one crackling frequency, I heard a woman sobbing. "If you find the way out, tell me, please," then static overcame it. My hands trembled on the wheel. Another station flickered in with a man's panicked voice, "We're stuck, can't escape, the roads lead nowhere," and then static. I nearly screamed. Was I hearing lost souls? Some cosmic glitch? Or maybe my exhausted mind conjured illusions. But I couldn't shake the dread. Something or someone else had been trapped in these cursed roads. And now I was next. At 5 a.m., the sky should have lightened, but dawn refused to break. I realized with horror that the horizon remained dark. My dashboard clock insisted it was 5:12 a.m. But outside, blackness reigned, as though time had frozen in an eternal pre-dawn. Fear choked me. This can't be real, I muttered. I jerked the wheel, Dolly swerving across the deserted asphalt. No matter which direction I aimed, the road twisted me back into the labyrinth. My GPS flickered, screen washing out. The coordinates had changed to random gibberish. Then an ominous phrase appeared on the screen, "No exit." My heart hammered. My mind screamed to wake up. But this was no dream. The roads just kept spinning into loops. My fuel gauge dipped below a quarter. If I ran out, I'd be stranded in this unholy place. In sheer desperation, I pulled Dolly onto the shoulder, set the brakes, and marched back to the trailer. I had to see the cargo. If it was causing this curse, maybe I could do something, dump it, burn it, anything. My keys fumbled in the lock. The trailer door groaned open. The crate loomed, steel-banded, menacing. I grabbed a crowbar from my toolbox, jammed it under the lid. "I have to see what you are," I growled, half mad with fear. The crate resisted at first, nails screeching. Then, with a final yank, the lid creaked open a crack. Instantly, a gust of foul air hit me, like old, rotting leaves and stagnant water. A low moan escaped from within. My blood froze. I forced the lid further. Inside, I saw darkness swirling like a living mist. No tangible object, just a mass of blackness that seemed to shift and pulse. My eyes stung. I recoiled, dropping the crowbar. That swirling blackness extended a tendril, almost like a shadowy arm, reaching for the crate's edge. A wave of despair crashed into my mind, scenes of winding roads and hopelessness. I staggered backward, slamming the crate lid shut. My thoughts reeled. This cargo was alive, or at least some supernatural entity. And it was warping reality to keep me driving forever. Shaking, I hammered the lid's nails back in place, resealing it. My hands trembled so fiercely I could barely manage. The moaning subsided. Then, as if in retaliation, thunder rumbled overhead. The gloom thickened. I scrambled to Dolly's cab, panting. If this thing wanted me to keep driving until I died, I had to find a way to break free. I remembered the phone number from the cargo contract, that woman's instructions: no stops, do not deviate from the route. She must have known about this curse. She wanted me to deliver it to some remote site so it wouldn't trap them but me. Fury ignited in me. I turned the ignition, determined to face the labyrinth. One chance remained: drive until I found a clue, or hopefully morning light. Yet the night never yielded. Hours seemed to pass. My watch read 7 a.m., then 8 a.m., 9 a.m., but the sky stayed starless. The road stayed deserted. Dolly's fuel gauge hovered precariously near empty. The labyrinth of roads gave no sign of release. My eyelids drooped, exhaustion a lead weight. I steeled myself, refusing to stop, fearful that if I slept, the entity might consume me. At some point, I noticed a faint glow ahead. My heart soared. Could it be an exit? I pressed Dolly's pedal, engine whining. The glow solidified into headlights. Another vehicle? I honked, flicked my high beams. The other vehicle was a battered pickup, crawling along. I pulled alongside, rolling down the window. "Hey!" I shouted. "You lost?" The driver turned, a gaunt man with hollow eyes, pale as a corpse. "There's no escape," he croaked, voice barely audible. "We've been driving for weeks, months. The roads never end." Then, as Dolly inched forward, the pickup vanished behind me, as though swallowed by darkness. My gut churned. That poor soul was stuck, too. Time lost meaning. My gas gauge hit the last dregs. Dolly sputtered, threatening to stall. Panic soared in my chest. If Dolly died, I'd be on foot, presumably even more helpless. The labyrinth seemed to sense my despair. Some roads narrowed to ruts, others vanished into thick undergrowth. My mind whirled. Then, a memory, the moment I pried the crate open. I glimpsed swirling darkness inside. Could it be that the entity wanted a host who wouldn't keep it sealed? If so, maybe I needed to exorcise it somehow, or destroy the crate. But the caretaker instructions from a typical haunting story? I had none. I only had Dolly, the crate, my wits. Desperate, I recalled an old legend about cursed objects requiring a ritual, maybe returning it to its rightful place, or naming it. Or was that nonsense from ghost stories? Yet with no other plan, I decided I had to attempt something. Pulling over, engine nearly stalling, I hopped out. The night was windless, deathly still. The crate sat in the trailer, quietly malevolent. I grabbed a can of spare diesel from Dolly's compartment, plus a flare. If I burned the crate, would that break the curse or unleash it fully? I had no clue. My only other option was to die on these roads, so I decided to chance it. I dragged the crate onto the ground outside Dolly, ignoring the swirling sense of dread that battered my thoughts. The entity within seemed to stir, the nails rattling. I poured diesel over the top, tears streaming down my cheeks from the fumes and terror. "I'm done," I hissed. "You won't trap me." With trembling hands, I lit the flare, tossed it onto the crate. For a moment, nothing. Then the flame caught, whooshing up. The crate's wood crackled, the stench of burning rot filling the air. The lid began to warp, and I heard a high-pitched keening, not so much in my ears as in my mind. My skull throbbed with agony. The swirling darkness inside the crate spilled forth, thrashing in the firelight like black smoke tendrils. I nearly collapsed from the psychic pressure. But the flames roared higher, consuming the crate. The darkness coalesced into a shape, a silhouette, writhing. I forced my eyes to stay open, watched as the shape twisted into an unearthly form that seemed to scream in voiceless fury. Then, with a final roar of flames, it vanished into sparks. The fire sputtered, leaving behind blackened scraps of wood. The stench evaporated. I stood there panting, heart in my throat. The hush in the air felt different, lighter. Could I have done it? Freed this cursed labyrinth from the entity's hold? Dolly's engine still idled behind me, sputtering on fumes. Then I noticed a faint glow in the east, a line of gray on the horizon. Dawn? My watch read 5:47 a.m., though it had read that hours ago. Now, though, the sky was actually brightening. I hurried back into Dolly, started driving. The road seemed different, straighter. Within minutes, I emerged onto a familiar stretch of highway. My phone pinged with a signal. A wave of relief nearly buckled me. The sun rose, painting the clouds in pink. The labyrinth was gone, the cursed night ended. Exhausted, I found a rail truck stop not far ahead. I collapsed in the parking lot, ignoring the stares from other drivers. After a nap, I tried calling Frankie, the dispatcher, to explain what happened. But his line was dead. Possibly he'd vanished or the job was never official in the first place. I considered telling the police, but how would I explain? That I'd been trapped in an endless loop by a cursed crate, then burned it? They'd lock me in a padded cell. All I know is that Dolly and I got out. The roads returned to normal. My biggest regret is the people who might still be lost in that labyrinth if their cargo led them astray. I imagine that battered pickup driver wandering for eternity, never finding the route I found. I collected my thoughts and resumed my life. The pay was never delivered, obviously. The triple rate had been a lie or ruse. But I'm alive, free. I left that region entirely, taking jobs far from those roads. Yet sometimes, late at night, I dream about indefinite highways, twisting in on themselves under a starless sky. I see headlights drifting aimlessly, the howls of lost truckers echoing. The older I get, the more I suspect this world holds pockets of darkness, places where normal rules break, where curses grip you if you're unlucky. We drivers say we've seen it all, but that night taught me otherwise. The next time you're behind the wheel, watch the road you choose. If your GPS starts leading you in circles, if the night refuses to end, if an unmarked crate or hush-hush cargo weighs on your rig, remember my story. Because once you slip into that cursed land, the trip might never end, unless you find the courage, or desperation, to sever the nightmare at its source, no matter how impossible it seems. For me, I'll keep Dolly rolling, but I'll never accept another job without verifying the route, the cargo, and the client. Some deals cost more than they pay, dragging you into a labyrinth from which there's no return. And if you do manage to escape, you'll never be the same. Because once you've glimpsed those roads of eternal darkness, you carry that dread forever, hearing phantom knocks at the trailer door, worrying that maybe, just maybe, the curse still lurks, waiting for the chance to pull you back in for one final drive. Story number 3. The Hidden Passenger. I've been driving trucks for going on 12 years now, and in that time, I've hauled just about everything you can imagine, crates of fresh produce, heavy machinery, even a traveling circus's elephants, though that one remains a tall tale told over many a greasy diner countertop. But none of those experiences prepared me for the night I realized something impossible was hitching a ride in my rig. Something that didn't belong in the world of the living. My name is Sam Dudley. I'm 53, single, and the proud owner of a blue Kenworth W900 that's more rust than paint in some places. People ask why I still run the roads, living half my life in sleeping compartments and gas station parking lots, but the truth is that the freedom's addictive. The hum of the engine, the promise of the next mile, there's a comforting rhythm to it. Or there was, until that dreadful night a few months ago, when I started feeling Dolly, that's my truck's name, acting heavier beneath my seat, like the weight distribution had shifted in ways I couldn't explain. I'd picked up a standard load from a logistics hub just outside Kansas City, a few pallets of electronics bound for a warehouse in Boise, Idaho. The cargo was straightforward, nothing special about the shipping forms. I double-checked the weight, just under 18,000 pounds, and set off in the early evening, figuring I'd make good time on relatively clear highways. But within hours, I noticed Dolly struggled on inclines more than she should. I've driven her for years and know her every wheeze and strain. This was different, as if an extra 1,000 pounds had materialized in the trailer. At first, I brushed it off, maybe a mild headwind or some mechanical hiccup. But around midnight, the real trouble began. I was powering along an empty stretch of I-80, with the radio tuned low to an old country station, half-lidded eyes scanning the road for deer. Then, from behind me, I heard a faint knocking sound, 3 short raps, as if someone tapped from inside the trailer's wall. My heart gave a lurch. I glanced at my side mirror, saw nothing but the reflection of Dolly's trailer lights in the blackness. I reasoned it was likely shifting cargo, boxes sliding around, or maybe a loose pallet strap. Still, it unnerved me. We checked the pallets thoroughly at the warehouse. They shouldn't be sliding. I found an off-ramp leading to a deserted rest stop, the overhead lights flickering. After parking Dolly in a lonely corner, I grabbed my flashlight and hopped out. An eerie hush clung to the night. Even the insects seemed to hush as I circled around to Dolly's rear. I unlatched the trailer's big metal doors, half expecting a pallet toppled over. Instead, everything looked pristine. The straps were tight. No boxes out of place. But the air inside felt heavy. As if stepping into the trailer changed the atmosphere. I sniffed, thinking I might smell smoke or a fuel leak, but caught only the faint odor of cardboard. Yet an unsettling sense crawled across my spine, telling me I wasn't alone in the darkness. I swung my flashlight left to right, seeing only stacked crates. No sign of movement, no footsteps. Nothing. I stepped back, shut the doors, tried to calm my nerves. You're just overtired, I told myself. Snap out of it. I drove on, ignoring occasional knocks that night. By dawn, I'd convinced myself it must be the trailer's expansion joints or some overlooked mechanical squeak. But a new symptom arose, a creeping fatigue that went beyond simple sleeplessness. My arms felt leaden, my eyes burned, and not in the usual way. It felt as if something was siphoning my energy from the marrow of my bones. My gut told me Dolly was heavier again, but that was impossible. The official weigh station readouts from yesterday were correct. I made my next stop at a bigger truck plaza for fuel. As I walked Dolly's perimeter, I heard a single low thud from the trailer. My heart rate spiked. Anyone in there? I said aloud, feeling foolish. No response. Checking for stowaways is standard in some areas, but come on, the doors were locked. The cargo seal was intact. This time, I forced myself to break the seal and check thoroughly. I rummaged between crates, shining my flashlight in every nook. Still no one, no sign of intrusion. The moment I finished, I felt a presence behind me, like someone or something was watching from the stacked pallets. I spun, found only shadows. My own breath echoed in the closed space. "All right," I muttered, slamming the doors again. "I need more coffee." That night, the knocks grew louder. They came in bursts, unpredictable. Sometimes it was a triple tap, sometimes a single heavy pound that made Dolly's frame shudder. Then at times, I heard scraping, as if nails dragged across the metal floor. My sweat turned cold. I pulled over multiple times, always to find the trailer immaculate, the cargo in place. By the fourth day, I felt haggard, eyes rimmed with dark circles, hands trembling from coffee overdose. My reflection in the truck stop bathroom mirror showed a man turning gray around the edges. Sleep was nearly impossible. Any time I dozed, I'd jolt awake from nightmares about footsteps creeping up behind me. Dolly's engine seemed to labor more, shifting gears felt sluggish. The fuel economy tanked. It was as though Dolly lugged an extra load none of us could see. The real terror came on a lonely stretch in Wyoming, around 2 a.m. The highway deserted, the stars half hidden by clouds. The knocks started again, more frantic. My pulse soared. Then I heard it, a voice. A faint moan, almost inaudible, emanating from behind me. My mind reeled. Could an animal have stowed away? Or a person kidnapped? Fear churned my stomach. I had to investigate again. I found the next exit, a dusty side road leading to an abandoned service station. Grass sprouted through cracked asphalt. My headlights raked across empty pumps. Parking Dolly near the shattered windows of the station's building, I jumped out, marched to the trailer, heart in my throat. "Anyone in there?" I called, fists tight. No answer. But when I put my ear to the metal, I heard a raspy exhale, like a sigh. My hair stood on end. Terrified, I flung the doors open. Darkness confronted me. The single overhead lamp from Dolly's rear wasn't enough to penetrate the gloom among the crates. My flashlight flickered. "Hello?" I forced out. "If you're in there, I can help." Silence. Then a faint scraping, deeper in the cargo. "I'm coming in," I announced, voice shaking. The floor felt cold under my boots. I weaved around the largest pallet, scanning for movement. My flashlight beam wavered across cardboard boxes. Something scuttled behind them, just a shape of shifting black. I nearly dropped the flashlight. "Come out." "I won't hurt you," I said, though I could barely breathe. Another scraping noise. I inched closer, rounding the pallet. But nothing. The corner was empty. Yet the sense of presence was overwhelming. Like someone breathing down my neck. My vision swam. Then a wave of dizziness hit, forcing me to lean on a crate. My limbs felt drained, as if energy was pouring out. A voice in my head whispered, "Leave, or you'll never leave." My eyes fluttered, seeing swirling shadows in the corner. In a panicked surge, I stumbled back. The trailer door was my only escape. I all but dove out, slamming it behind me. My chest heaved, heart thundered. It took me hours to collect myself. Dawn broke over that ruined gas station, painting the sky in pale gold. The knocks had gone silent again. Summoning willpower, I resumed the journey, determined to deliver this cursed load and wash my hands of it. Something was messing with me. My entire body felt heavier with each passing hour, as though I were slowly being drained. I coughed, tasting metal in my mouth. My arms ached. Dolly felt like she was towing an entire mountain. As the day wore on, I made a call to the logistics firm, demanding they confirm the weight. The rep sounded confused. Yes, the manifest was correct, no changes. I ended the call with frustration. By late afternoon, I was nearing the warehouse destination, or so the GPS said. The final leg took me onto a quiet rural route, farmland stretching for miles. The place looked normal enough, but an undercurrent of dread thrummed in my veins. My phone battery died abruptly. Though I charged it earlier, it was as if it had been drained. By the time I spotted the warehouse, a nondescript building behind a chain fence, I felt half dead myself, eyes drooping, breath shallow. Parking Dolly in the gravel lot, I staggered out, scanning for staff. The overhead lights flickered in the evening gloom. No one greeted me. I rang the buzzer, pounded on the locked office door. No response. Confused, I circled around, finding an open dock door. Dim fluorescent tubes lit a wide, empty loading bay. A single forklift sat idle. My footsteps echoed. Hello? I got your shipment. I called. Silence. Then, from behind me, the trailer door gave a metallic groan. My skin prickled. Did the entity want out? Nerves taut as piano wire, I approached the trailer. The padlock was undone. But I never unlocked it. My heart hammered. Slowly, I opened the door. The crates remained, but in the corner, a swirling blackness pooled, shaped almost like a crouched figure. My flashlight flickered as I raised it. The figure pulsed, exuding cold. I felt my energy leaching away, head spinning. The black shape seemed to watch me, though it had no eyes. Then it drifted forward. Instinct screamed, run. But my legs felt leaden. The shape extended a tendril, brushing my shoulder. A wave of weakness buckled my knees. I collapsed onto the threshold, gasping. From the corner of my fading vision, I glimpsed the crate's cardboard flaps shifting. The blackness seeped from within. My mind reeled, this thing had hitched onto the cargo. Or was the cargo itself, inhabiting the illusions of boxes? Now it was out, feeding on me. My body felt like sinking in tar. The shape loomed above, swirling. I tried to scream, but no sound emerged. It's going to kill me here, I thought, and no one will ever know. Then footsteps approached, rapid, purposeful. A man in a lab coat? No, a uniform. He dashed forward, brandishing a small device that emitted a high-pitched hum. The black shape recoiled, letting out a silent shriek in my mind. The man pressed the device, and arcs of bluish electricity crackled across the black form, which writhed, flailing. My chest seized. The swirling darkness was forced back, retreating into the crate's corner. The man barked over his shoulder, now. Another figure joined him, tossing a strange, powdery substance around the swirling blackness. The entity shrank, condensing into a smaller shape. My vision swam with shock. They snapped the crate shut, hooking some mechanical lock. The black shape hammered inside, but the crate's walls glowed faintly with runes or something. I had no time to process. My lungs spasmed, and I passed out, collapsed on the concrete floor. When I came to, I was lying on a makeshift cot in an office. My entire body felt weak, like I'd just recovered from a raging flu. The man in uniform, I realized it was a private security uniform, handed me water. You'll be all right, he said, though worry tinged his voice. We almost lost you. Confusion and terror churned in me. What was that thing? I rasped. He hesitated, then said, we call them siphons. They attach themselves to shipments, feed off drivers' life force. We've been trying to contain them. This load was supposed to be handled by our team, but something went wrong with your dispatch. He shook his head. I'm sorry. I swallowed, the dryness in my throat painful. So, you guys know about these siphons? This is real? He nodded grimly. Real as it gets. They've been popping up in certain cargo routes, latching onto unsuspecting carriers. The shipments get heavier, the driver grows weaker, until eventually, well, you can guess. Then the siphon hunts its next victim. We had a specialized containment procedure, but it seems someone messed up. You ended up with the job. Anger and relief tangled inside me. Why the hell didn't your people warn me? I nearly died. The man exhaled, face taut. Because the entire operation is hush-hush. Corporate, government, we're not sure who's running it. We do what we can to track these anomalies, ensure they're contained. This warehouse is one of our safe house labs. We had a team waiting, but the entity overcame them. You arrived just in time. A swirl of questions danced in my exhausted brain. But I felt my eyelids droop. The security man patted my shoulder, told me to rest. Next time I stirred, it was morning, real morning, sunlight streaming through dusty windows. My body ached, but the oppressive weakness had lifted. The caretaker from the previous night, some scientist or specialist, explained I was free to go, that they'd handle the siphon. No further explanation. He handed me an envelope stuffed with cash, presumably compensation. "We're sorry for your ordeal," he said quietly. "We suggest you don't speak of this. For your safety, you understand." I left in a daze. Dolly was parked out back. She'd been cleaned, the trailer emptied of that cursed cargo. My entire rig felt lighter, as if a great burden was gone. I started the engine, noticing Dolly purred smoothly, no laboring. A wave of relief and sorrow washed over me. So that was it. I'd encountered a supernatural entity feeding on my life. No one would believe it if I told them. I barely believed it myself. I drove away from that warehouse, the road open under the bright morning sky. Over time, my strength returned. The nightmares, though, haven't fully receded. I still jolt awake some nights, hearing phantom knocks on Dolly's trailer, feeling a swirl of darkness pressing in. But I remind myself the siphon is contained, someone else's problem. The world is large, and we truckers pass through corners of it most folks never see. Maybe there are more siphons out there, hitching rides on unsuspecting cargo. Maybe that corporate group or government unit hunts them down, ensuring average people remain blissfully ignorant. Or maybe the next driver who hears odd knocks at 2 a.m. won't be as lucky as me. At the next rest stop, I found a quiet corner, scrapped the old dispatch phone number from my records, blocked the shady dispatch from calling again. I want no part in that shadowy underworld. Let them handle their cursed cargo without involving an honest trucker. Since then, I've stuck to standard freight, triple-checking each manifest. If the load sounds too good to be true or if the client is too cagey about the cargo, I pass. Because once you felt that soul-sucking presence creeping inside your rig, you realize no paycheck is worth your life. And every so often, as Dolly and I cruise under a moonlit sky, I catch a faint echo from the trailer, just wind rattling, I tell myself. But in that moment, my hands tighten on the wheel, and I flash back to the swirling blackness, the knock at the metal, the cold draining from my bones. I flick the radio on to chase away silence, forcing a tune to fill the emptiness. Because while Dolly might be free of that passenger, my mind is not. I'll carry that memory as long as I drive, and maybe beyond. So if you ever see me on the highway, keep an eye out. I'll be the driver scanning every shadow, cautious of every bump in the trailer. The road might be endless, but I've learned the hard way that sometimes the scariest passengers aren't the ones sitting in the cab, they're the ones that slither into your trailer unseen, feeding on your spirit, leaving you emptier with each mile. Maybe that's just a campfire ghost story, or maybe it's real enough to cost you everything if you're not careful. As for me, I've still got miles to go. But I pray I never hear that knock again, never sense that flicker of unnatural weight pressing on Dolly's frame. Because one brush with the unknown was enough to change me forever, reminding me that on these lonely roads, we're never truly alone.